Good evening, curious minds out there across the internet, and welcome to the Behind the Radio for episode 2 of season 2, parts 1 and 2. A bit of a mouthful there. In the Shadows of Time, Our Lost and Hidden History. This was one of the original episodes that I conceived of when I first started, when I decided that I was going to come back and do this podcast. I knew that it was going to be an undertaking, and the first season, I don't know, we started off with kind of a prelude that I believe sort of set the tone in some ways, even though I struggled with it, and I'm not happy with how it ended up, but it had to be done. And then I feel like we kind of carried out that trajectory throughout the season, and there were a lot of things that I wanted to talk about that didn't really fit in, I guess, with kind of the thematically with the way that things were going with that season. And once we got on that arc, that particular trajectory, I really didn't want to deviate from it. I felt like we were going to, I kind of wanted to keep all the information in a somewhat linear fashion, I guess, if that makes sense, and logically follow out how those events kind of all factored into one another without directly, making a grand arcing conspiracy to tie it all together, because I just kind of wanted to present the evidence, which is all I ever try to do, and then let you guys decide if you think that there was more to it. But to kind of interject something like this, or like any of the other episodes from this season into that, because a lot of these are episodes that I thought of, like I said, way back when I first wanted to do the podcast. They just didn't fit into season 1. But this has definitely been a topic that I've been very interested in for a very long time. As far back as I can remember, and one civilization that I didn't really touch on at all, but I find extremely compelling, even though it is supposedly completely figured out and researched to death and whatnot. But Egyptology is something that has interested me personally since really as far back as I can remember. I can remember being a really small kid and seeing a book about Egypt, and I think maybe it was about King Tut's tomb or something like that, and I was just fascinated by it and remained that way. I couldn't get enough of it. I read about it every chance I got when I started reading. It's just been a lifelong passion for me. I really love that kind of stuff, and that led me down the road of archaeology. I wanted to be an archaeologist for a long time. I got talked out of it, and I regret that still to this day in a lot of ways. I've enjoyed my life. It's been very interesting, if nothing else, but I do kind of regret not following out those archaeological dreams that I had as a wee one, because this stuff is truly fascinating to me. It's stuff that I really love. I'm very passionate about it, so I knew that it was an episode that I had to do. Particularly about just some of this lost history that we have, that I personally definitely feel is out there. I think that huge chapters are missing. I'll get into that more as the episode goes on, but yeah, I don't know. I hope that you guys enjoyed it and found it interesting. I hope that I was able to present some things that you hadn't heard about before. I tried to go with some of the more quasi-mainstream but still very obscure or lesser talked about but somewhat known places, because there was a lot more research done on those. So yeah, I feel like that makes it a little bit more compelling, and it's not just something that you're going to see one single one-off internet story about, because that makes it really impossible from a research standpoint. Because I don't know if you guys know, but whenever I do these episodes, whether it's about Oklahoma City or if it's about lost civilizations, I go multiple sources, and I fact check myself over and over, because I want to make sure that the information that I put out to you guys is as accurate as I possibly can make it. That really matters to me. I don't want to put out any kind of crazy disinformation. That's why I don't jump on some of the crazier conspiracy theory things that are out there. I just kind of try to present evidence, especially, in the main episodes where it's something that I've researched and I can feel confident in the things that I bring to you, because I know that I've found this across multiple verifiable sites and information and books and stuff. So it takes some time. In other words, this all takes some time. In these 2 episodes, that's why we had to push the release schedule back to Friday for both of them. And it might be something that we kind of carry on for a little while, to be honest. It just gives me all this season 2 episodes, all of them, require quite a bit of research. And I've done some on a few of them, but to really get it all together, script it all out, and put it together in a way that's going to be, I guess, easier to understand and make a narrative point as well, and be hopefully somewhat entertaining. I don't know. I try my best to make this entertaining and not just dry, but there's a lot of information. A lot of these are very, very dense with information, so it takes time to get all that together. And by scooting it back a few days, it really does help me out a lot, at least. And hopefully you feel it's worth it. You know, I'm doing everything for this show, particularly this season, all of the music, all the production, everything. And it takes time to do this stuff. Before, when I was just doing with Spotify, they kind of had a way where you could add music in and use a bunch of prefab stuff, which I did for like maybe the first episode or so of the first season. But then I took over doing a lot of it, but I still didn't do the background music and stuff like that, or some of the transitions. This season I'm doing everything, so that takes a little more time as well. So there's just a lot more production that goes into these episodes, and that's the reason for the delay. I just thought I would explain that a little bit. So to kind of recap on the episode a little bit, and some of the things I don't really feel need that much more context. Göbekli Tepe is a very interesting place. I think that a lot more research needs to be done about it. I know that they're still excavating there, and they're finding new stuff all the time. So it's hard to really definitively say a whole lot about it, because I don't think that we really know a whole lot about it. And the way that a lot of dates are derived in archaeology is they'll, find a layer of it where there's some sort of organic material that they can date, and then they associate everything else with that date. So a lot of the times these dates are far from accurate. They try and go to, to the lowest level they can to get some sort of organic materials to test. But a lot of the times, it's not necessarily all that accurate, at least in my personal opinion. I think that any archaeologist that really is willing to be honest about it would probably say the same thing. And so the next place that we discussed, I'm going to try to remember these and go in sort of a linear fashion. Non Madal, I believe the second one in that first episode, which means within or between the intervals, depending on, the translation that you find for it. But it's just in reference to the canals that we spoke of, because even the canals are paved with these stones, and it's a truly remarkable place. I hope that if you hadn't heard about it before, after you listened to the first episode, you went and checked it out, because it's crazy looking. It really is. It's a place that I've always wanted to go to. I've always found it very, very fascinating since I first heard about it. I don't know that I did a good enough job, honestly, of conveying just how crazy this place is, and the size of the basalt columns that are stacked up like a log house, basically. Some of them very high up in ways that just doesn't make any kind of logical sense. The fact that it is basically like a floating city really doesn't make a ton of sense. There's nothing else like it, really, on the face of the earth. It's a very, very unique place. And it's one that I think we truly don't understand. Definitely not to the extent that mainstream archaeology or historians would try to make you believe that they understand it. I really don't think it's that well understood, because there's a lot of very perplexing things about it. And I don't even think I included this in the main episode, but the original name of it, what locals there refer to it as anyways, and I even wrote this down, I'm still probably going to get it wrong, Sun Na Ling, or translated to Reef of Heaven. And I think that kind of signifies what a remarkable place it was at one time, and I'm sure what an incredibly beautiful sight it was to see. I think the next thing that we went over in the episode, I can't promise I'm going to go linear in all of this. A lot of this is going to be stream of consciousness, by the way, so just buckle up, folks. I'm going to do my best here. But I did want to talk about the Grand Canyon. Not so much what we talked about in the episode, because to be real, I have no way of verifying this G.E. Kincaid story. It's very interesting. It's been retold a ton of times. It's fascinating. but there's really no proof of it outside of one main article that gets quoted in that newspaper, and then I think there was one small follow-up or a reprint in another newspaper, but outside of that, there's really nothing to verify that story. A lot of people have gone there and tried to find it, and what's happened with them is very compelling, but I'm going to have to see a lot more proof before I can really say that I believe that at all. But the Hopi, which is what is a little more compelling about the Grand Canyon, because the Grand Canyon is a very interesting place in and of itself, that story aside. But the Hopi believed that it was like the gateway to the afterlife, or the location of Sipapu. I think that's right. Sipapu. You can look that up. But anyways, it's basically like a portal between the underworld and our corporeal world here. They considered it a very sacred place, and kind of like where humanity began, where mankind supposedly kind of emerged at the dawn of time from, which is interesting because many other native cultures, like both here in the US and around the world really, share some kind of origin story or belief that mankind originated from either underground or from caves, most of which, speaking about going underground. Even like my Choctaw family, they'll tell you that we came from Naniwaya, which is like a great mound, and it still exists. It's in southern Winston County. It's in Mississippi. It's kind of like its own place, really. It's a bit of a pilgrimage site, and I feel bad that I haven't already been there. I've always wanted to go. It's very revered by the Choctaw people, but they believe that is like our origin point, or where we came from. But tons of other Native Americans and natives from around the world, like I said, all believe in some form or another that we emerged from underground, which is, to me, what makes the Grand Canyon a little more interesting, aside from its just incredible, ridiculous natural beauty and how large it is. And the formations, whatever they are, that are named after all the different like Egyptian gods and goddesses, and the temples, as they're referred to as, those are all really neat. It's very cool, but it's most likely that the person that was, assigned with naming them and being like kind of the cartographer for that area probably was just really into Egyptology. And so a lot of that can kind of just be explained away. It's not like there's anything there that's truly indicative of having come from Egypt that I've ever seen any real proof of anyways. There might be, I may be totally off base about that and just not know, but all the research that I've been able to do, I haven't found a shred of tangible evidence about that. And while the G. Kincaid story is very interesting, regardless, it is made slightly more compelling by all of the strange security measures at certain areas of the canyon. And some of this is not for like safety. It's understandable if they just don't want you to fall off the edge or something. But there's like big gates blocking off underground areas and caves and stuff. And it's locked down in a lot of places throughout there. And there's a lot of videos, like I think I mentioned this in the episode, of those black helicopters, the like either military or part of the intelligence apparatus black helicopters that you hear about all the time in conspiracy circles. But they have been recorded several times out there, so there is something more to it. I'm sure they're not there for your safety. But as far as what that is, I can't even remotely claim that I know what that is. I think it's a cool place. I don't know how much stock I put in that story that we covered. But again, that's just me. That's just my take. As always, I always suggest that you investigate for yourself and come to your own conclusions. So, I believe we talked about Tiwanaku/Pumapunku, which is another place of origin for a native culture. Technically, the Inca believed that Inti, I think it's INTI if I'm not mistaken, which is basically like the sun. A lot of native cultures worship the sun as its own like creator deity. I mean, and if you think about it, it is the giver of all life on the planet, as far as like, tangible things within our realm that do truly give life to plants and animals. But Inti sent 2 of his children, and they were supposed to like bring mankind to order, I believe. But they emerged from everyone's favorite lake, Lake Titicaca, which I would love to have seen like the first modern English-speaking explorers to go there, and when they asked the locals what the lake was named, I would love to have been a fly on the wall for that moment. Anyways, I digress. Tiwanaku and Pumapuku are incredible sites. When the Inca settled that region and like first built their empire there were a lot of ancient sites, and there's a ton just scattered all around that area. But this particular place stood out to them for whatever reason as a place of special reverence and like a center of power. And the Inca have a history of like inhabiting and just kind of claiming the ruins of civilizations that they conquered rather, and other cultures, and just kind of absorbing them into their story as if they're responsible for it. But they didn't really do that with Tiwanaku, which is what's the most interesting to me, because if they felt like they could have claimed it and taken credit for it, they absolutely would have. That's the MO of the Inca. But they thought that it held such importance and was such a momentous site that they attributed it to the gods. And rather, they just incorporated their creator god, Viracocha, into the mythology of it, and chose to consider it to be like the place where Viracocha created all of the Indian people, which I guess kind of in a way gave the Inca claim over all of the people of the Andes, because it was their god who supposedly created all of the different people there. And so in a way they kind of laid claim to all of it, but they also didn't feel like they could say that they built it, which is a rarity for the Inca. And the site was considered to be a very spiritual place for like millennia before the Inca even found it. Its construction is attributed to, and I guess the name is taken from, a culture that's called Tiwanaku. But there's not really like a whole lot that's known about who the Tiwanakan people were. It's believed they were more just like kind of a network of powerful families that brought people together just to build like these giant monuments. Which, let's just talk about what I mean by giant monuments again for just a second. We talked about it some in the episode, but I'm not sure that I really conveyed it all that well. But how many people would they have had to get together in order to, cut, quarry, transport all of these ridiculously heavy stones? Not even to mention like placing them where they need them and constructing things out of them. Some of them are believed to weigh 144 tons, which is like 262,000 pounds. It's mind-boggling to think about. How many people would it take to move something like that? How would you even arrange enough people in order to move something like that? Even with ropes or whatever. How would you all work together on that in order to move it? And again, it's not like they just drug them up this hill and left them there. They placed them in constructions and had to elevate these somehow. And you also have to consider that these came from quarries. The bigger ones came from like 6.2 miles away, and the giant andesite ones, which were smaller than the other ones but still very sizable blocks, those believed to have come from a place that's like 56 miles away or something. It's just mind-boggling. And when I say like the smaller andesite stones, you and probably everyone couldn't get together and move one of these andesite stones. Those are like the big H blocks. If you went on the Facebook page and checked out some of the pictures that I posted about the last episode, then you saw what I'm talking about. Or you may have seen them on something else. They kind of fit together almost like Legos or like some kind of prefabricated blocks. They're incredible, but they're very heavy, and they came from a long way away. And it's just these people didn't even have the benefit of the wheel. It's just really hard to wrap your mind around how they were able to even construct this place. And there's tons of theories, but again, no one's been able to do it or, verifiably prove that this is how it was done. So, I mean, it's all a lot of speculation, which is, the more you dig, the more you'll find is the case with a whole lot of archaeology, unfortunately. It is not a perfect science, and I'm sure that they're all doing their absolute best, but they have, certain procedures and guidelines to follow, and there's really no perfect way to do this. We can't rewind time and look, to be sure. So there's, you have to take what you're given and work with it. And a lot of the times, unfortunately, it's just not a complete picture. But I want to say the next place we talked about was probably Yonaguni Monument. And I don't want to just, bit by bit go through and rehash every single place that we talked about and basically like recap the entire 2 parts episode. But I do want to add a little bit of context here and there. But Yonaguni is definitely another one of those places that's worth you checking out if you haven't. There's some pretty compelling stuff there. I'm going to go ahead and give you a heads up. There's also a lot of misinformation about it. Just because people tend to try to make stories as salacious as possible to get the clicks, to get people to watch the shows or whatever it is. That's where like the Japan's Atlantis and all that crazy stuff comes from. We don't know enough about it to say what it was or what it could have been a part of. And it definitely deserves a lot further research. It's in kind of a difficult spot to do a lot of research though. It takes a fairly decent diver to even be able to stay remotely stable there to check the place out because, like I said, it's kind of murky waters. It's a very strong current that flows through there. There's sharks. Apparently some people don't care about that, but that would be enough to keep me from checking it out. But it's a fascinating place that definitely deserves a really good look. And I don't think that it's gotten that look. So I definitely wanted to bring that one up in the episode. If you hadn't heard of it, I hope that you did check it out a little bit and thought it was cool looking. It's definitely cool looking. I don't know. It doesn't look just like, oh, yeah, that's absolutely man-made. But there are some parts of it that definitely do look man-made. And if some of the information that I've found is, true and correct from these people that have been there, and there are like chevrons and plus signs and some of the other symbols that we see all over the world throughout time, that's very strong indication that it was above sea level at one point, and it is a man-made construction for the most part, or at least that mankind has had some sort of worked on it to some degree, which is incredibly impressive because it's not like they dove down there free diving and did it. So it's an interesting place, and I think it's definitely deserved a little more investigation for sure. I know we talked about the Cuban pyramids because these were both in the second episode, and the Cuban pyramids are definitely a place that needs much more study. And I'm really not sure why no one has taken like a small submersible or an ROV down there and gotten a better look or taken higher quality video of it or something. I mean, because it's not a hoax. As far as I can tell anyways, there's a lot of legit scientists that seem really convinced that something is definitely there, that's definitely man-made. It's kind of weird that we haven't heard anything else about it because it's not like a recent really discovery. It's been known of for some time. I mean, I know mainstream archaeology kind of has a stranglehold over information that might conflict with the narrative. It might kind of force them to admit that they weren't right about some things. So I'm sure that might be one of the reasons, possibly, that it hasn't had further investigation done on it. But it's really a very, very crazy place. I don't know why some rich guy, at least, that's curious about this stuff hasn't decided to go down there in a sub and check it out. I can understand them being a little wary, especially after recent events, but it's not even that far down for, a submersible. Somebody call or tweet Elon or something. Let's get somebody that has the means down there to check this place out, because I really want more information on it. It's, as soon as I heard about it, which was several years ago, it really impressed me. It blew my mind, the pictures that I was seeing of it, which are kind of just colorized sonar, really. I don't know how precise or accurate the images that we have of it are. I posted one of those on the Facebook page too, I believe, though, if you want to check it out. And it's probably the same one that you'll see anywhere else, because there's not a lot of study been done on it. There's really not any further imaging. There is more, but not that has been published. So it's kind of tough to get any more information about the place. But I think we definitely need more info. Inquiring minds want to know. But I want to talk also real quick about the Longu Caves. It's another anomaly that really makes no sense at all for many, many reasons. I wanted to talk about this one because the markings along the wall, and they're on the walls, they're on the columns, they're on the ceilings, they're compelling enough because of their like similarity to marks that you can see all over the world that resemble modern tools. I think I kind of mentioned that in the episode, but along with the fact that places like the Yangshan Monument, Baalbek, Petra, India, Italy, I think Greece has some, and there's somewhat similar ones. It's really what can only be described as like some sort of machine work. They all bear this same kind of marking that would be very strange for people to just meticulously do with a chisel, because it's all over. You know what I mean? It's like if you cleared something out like that with like a giant drill or something, the marks that it would leave behind, because the pattern is so precise and over every single square inch of it. And I don't know how much you've looked into the stuff like in Egypt, how some of the discarded stones that weren't actually used in any of the constructions there, but they were quarried and worked on and then kind of discarded. But you'll see what can only be described as like drills, like precision drilled holes with markings from whatever was used to do it left on it. And even like little start stops, like if you had like a big hole cutter, I don't know the exact name, you know what I'm talking about, like a core type thing to cut out a core of something. It has like marks where somebody has started and decided that wasn't the right spot and then moved it over, or like a misstart on certain places. And there's really no good explanation for how that stuff was done at that time in history, and it's puzzled researchers to this day, and no one has a good explanation for it, at least not that I've heard. And absolutely insane as it admittedly sounds, there is a growing amount of evidence for some sort of lost technology or ancient tools that were somehow similar to modern machine tools existing somewhere back in our ancient past somehow. I can't explain that, but there's a ton of evidence for things like that, and it really doesn't make any sense. Another compelling feature of several ancient sites is a building technique, this is one key point that I wanted to talk about in this episode, and something that I feel I can't give you a conclusive answer at the end of this. You know, I'm going to go ahead and warn you, put that out there. But I do feel that somehow it connects all of these unexplained sites almost, to some degree. But it's the polygonal style of masonry, which is a very sophisticated and still totally unexplained construction technique. It's where there's like, I'm sure you've seen this, but it's like walls, or even there's entire like buildings, or partial buildings at least, that were constructed with this. And it's usually with massive stone blocks, where rather than like simply stacking them up like you would do bricks or something, and there's no kind of mortar used. There's not even any of those like curious little metal cramps that we talked about in the main episode. But the blocks themselves are just cut in a way as to fit intricately and precisely, often without like room for you to put like a sheet of paper, you know, the old proverbial thing. Like you really can't fit a razor blade or a sheet of paper between these blocks. They're fit so precisely. they fit together like puzzle pieces. You've probably seen it. There's a lot of Incan walls, or attributed. I think we've already talked about how the Inca are, but attributed to the Inca that are done in this fashion. But they have like, little notches in them that fit just absolutely precisely with the block beside it. And it's believed that it's done in like a three-dimensional space as well. So it's not just like the face of the stone, but they're so tightly fitted, and it's such an amazing style of construction that, I mean, these things have stayed standing for Lord knows how long. Through earthquakes and floods and catastrophes and everything else, these things have remained. Now, typically the constructions are just like attributed to whatever civilization is found around them, but it's a little odd that this exact, highly precise, and very unique style of construction just so happened to be discovered by like every culture with no known contact to each other on virtually every single continent on Earth, except Antarctica that we know of. I mean, that's a whole episode in and of itself though. But I'm talking about from the Incans, Egyptians, the Romans, the Greeks, to places that are like totally isolated. Like there's some examples of it on Easter Island. Hold on, I've actually got a list of some other places. Albania, Crimea, Ecuador, Finland, Hungary, India, Iran, Italy, Japan, Malta, Mexico, Morocco, Peru, the Philippines, Portugal, Romania, Russia, Spain, Sudan, Sweden, Syria, Thailand, Turkey, in some of the oldest buildings in the UK, a few in the US, and they all have examples of this same style of masonry. And you'll see that, like, typically there's construction of far less quality and without using this technique, and like much smaller blocks that'll be found on top of the original structures. And that's kind of why they attribute this part of it to whatever civilization has built on top of it. But it's pretty clear and obvious to me, and I would think anyone else that sees it, that was done later, and just trying to like build onto or shore up or whatever, replicate very poorly the technique that they found, because nowhere else in any of those civilizations, in any of these other places that I've named, is there other buildings done like that. I mean, that is known to definitely be attributed to those cultures. You know what I'm saying? It's just these very specific places, and the way that this construction is done, it's unique to that spot. And anything that is more recent, that's been built alongside of it, it just really pales completely in comparison to these original structures. And these stones are always way bigger than any other stones that any of those civilizations used in any of their other constructions, especially places like Baalbek, which is one that I probably should have covered, to be honest, but I would suggest that you look into it, because there's some staggeringly heavy blocks there that will blow your mind when you see how big they actually are. I'm talking about the foundation stones. If you check out some pictures from Baalbek, I promise that you'll see what I'm talking about. And mainstream archaeology will have you believe that this was all done with copper and stone tools, just because they have no evidence of them using anything else but those during the period that most of these are supposedly constructed. But there is a small issue with that fact, and it's hardly ever discussed, but copper is a pretty soft metal. I don't know if you've ever messed with like a copper pipe or any kind of like close to pure copper, but it's extremely malleable and easy to dent up and destroy, or damage, I guess, at least. Bear in mind, many of these giant stone blocks are granite. Copper isn't breaking granite. Even if, like, they say wedges, I've heard wedges being used with sand and water and getting like on the exact grain. They found the exact grain that they need to break it along. If that was possible, it doesn't explain how they then shaped those blocks into these like puzzle pieces to fit together so perfectly, and that are so well made that they've withstood everything we talked about, the earthquakes and the catastrophes and all of this. and most of them remain in near perfect condition today. And if this was done at a time with no global trade or even contact between a vast majority of those cultures at all whatsoever, then what a ridiculously big coincidence it is that they just all happened to figure out this technique on every single continent on Earth at the same time, or relatively the same time. That's quite the coincidence. When you take everything we've talked about into consideration, it starts to become kind of difficult to imagine that some parts, at least, likely many, of our shared history, our collective story, has been lost, maybe even hidden from us. There are also so many other examples that I just didn't have time to cover, more than you could really imagine, guys. It's definitely a topic that has always interested me, and it's something that I would be more than happy to revisit at some point in the future. If you guys would be interested in hearing more about other places, or you have places that you want me specifically to talk about, let me know. I've honestly just kind of laid the groundwork and barely even scratched the surface of everything that's out there, but I only have so much time, guys. So I tried my best to kind of hit some of the high points along the way. We're steadily finding more and more legitimate evidence of structures and civilizations dating back at least 20,000 years or so. And from like footprints, you may have seen some like the footprints that are like alongside dinosaur tracks in the same strata, things like that. And buildings, they found these like structures, these hut-like structures in Jordan. What's the name of that place? Karana 4, I think is the name of the site. Don't quote me on that, something like that. But there's many other compelling sites found in that region, and many are beginning to speculate that some sort of advanced civilization evolved like before we did, before modern humans on this planet, possibly hundreds of millions years ago. And I know you're probably thinking, like, how would that even be possible? Wouldn't we find evidence of them like we have for dinosaurs or something like that? Well, dinosaurs, bear in mind, dinosaurs existed, it's believed, for like 150 million years or something. So the evidence that we have of them even is still very scant at best, to be honest. And it took us a long time to even find that, the little bit that we have of the dinosaurs. It's taken quite a while to even discover those bones and evidence of them ever existing on this planet. And when you factor in like global cataclysms and floods and the fact that time itself covers and buries everything deep below our current ground, I mean, there really isn't any telling what all is down there. And we also find new things all the time. Out-of-place artifacts, discoveries like we've been discussing that don't really fit neatly into our current timeline. Our currently accepted timeline of history has modern humans spreading across the world and reaching a point capable of complete annihilation in only about 100,000 years, right? So if a similar thing happened, say several hundred millions of years ago, or even 1 million years ago, what evidence on a grand scale would there even be to find? Finding it would be more difficult than like just a tiny needle in the proverbial haystack of time. It would be virtually impossible. Still, it's Echo's call to us to get deep for a minute, from far back in the shadows of our time, begging us to remember. Are all of these Cyclopean, as they are often referred to as far as the Polygonal Masonry? You'll often hear those referred to as like Cyclopean construction. I mean, could it have all been built from some sort of super civilization that was here before our continents even floated apart, for example? Because they believe, Pangea and all that there was, all the continents were much closer together at one time. I guess that's a possibility, but that would also push that timeline way, way back. It's been proven that conditions on this planet were such to facilitate much larger life forms. From plants to animals, there's evidence of giant trees being here at one time. And then you think about dinosaurs, and they do believe that the conditions, atmospheric, the oxygen levels, and such on, so on, everything was conducive to allowing things to grow a lot larger at one point. So I guess my question is, could these enormous multi-ton stone blocks have been cut and moved into place by a much larger species, possibly? It would certainly answer a lot of very difficult questions that, regardless of what's been put out there, our modern scientists and archaeologists honestly struggle to give any kind of an answer to how this stuff was done. Any sort of tangible, believable answer, anyway. And accounts of giants can be found in nearly every ancient culture on Earth. Even the Bible talks about the Nephilim. I'll probably misquote this, but there were giants on the earth in those days and afterwards, something like that. Actually, the Bible mentions giants like 32 separate times, I believe. So, and many Native American tribes have oral traditions about, like, you may have heard of like the races of the cannibalistic, like red-haired giants, mostly out west. Lovelock Cave in Nevada is an example, which is like allegedly the place where the local natives ended up finally like trapping the last of the red-haired giants or whatever in the cave, and then they set it ablaze and ended up killing off the last of them. That's like, oral tradition for several native tribes in that area. And there's a lot of really compelling evidence from Lovelock Caves. If you never really looked into them, that's definitely another place to check out. It didn't really fit into this episode, but if you're interested in this kind of stuff, it's definitely something I would say to give a look at. And from the 1800s through the middle of the 20th century, really, newspapers would run articles describing the discovery of giant skeletons and bones. It's been reported on several occasions, actually, that giant skeletons were found in some of the larger mounds that are attributed to Native Americans, the Native American burial mounds, though refuted by many as not what he, quote-unquote, meant. I'll let you look up the notes for what I'm about to talk about, and you can decide for yourself personally. I don't claim to know his intentions when he said this. I'm just going to state his words real quick. But Abraham Lincoln had written in a series of notes that he wrote after he visited Niagara Falls that, quote, "The eyes of that species of extinct giants, whose bones fill the mounds of America, have gazed on Niagara as ours do now," end quote. And while I'm not here to convince you one way or another about giants or really anything else, I can't definitively give you answers to things like that. I just thought it might be important to at least present this argument as well, and while offering possible explanations, because there's a lot of compelling evidence for, the existence of giants. I don't want to get too crazy here, but there's also a lot of people out there that would insist to you that nothing short of aliens could be responsible for constructing half this stuff. And while sure, I don't doubt their existence really at this point, or even that possibly they were involved with us as a species at some point in our history, I feel it would be kind of selling mankind a bit short to assume that across our vast, likely more so than we realize, as we've been talking about, across our vast history, that we were at no point capable of feats that we currently can't comprehend, or that at some point of time we weren't, for one reason or another, more capable or even more advanced than we are today. Especially with the ever-growing body of evidence to prove that we were. I guess anything is possible, though. One thing is for sure, however, until mainstream archaeology and historians are willing to at least possibly admit that they got it wrong, or even they simply just don't know, and more of them decide to go against the grain of the needlessly rigid model of our past on this planet, and if they can't fund and legitimately investigate these things with open minds to find out, then we will never truly know. And sadly, all of this and so much more is just going to remain lost in the shadows of time. There are tons more unexplained artifacts out there, by the way. Way more than I could ever hope to cover. I didn't talk about half of them because either they've been done to death or there isn't really enough there to give you evidence to prove or disprove them. The ones I picked were just kind of a few that I thought you may not have heard of, or if you wanted to dig into, there was at least some information out there for you, and I was curious about those, so I decided to investigate them, and in the process, on a few of them, I feel kind of disproved them to myself, but I wanted to still bring it to you and just objectively tell you what I have found, and let you make your own decisions about what you believe, and hopefully encourage you to investigate those things a little more. But if you want to dig some more, there's a few out there with abundance of information available. I felt that a lot of these that I'm about to name off have been covered to death, or, I don't really buy into some of them. But if you're interested in those kind of things, here's a quick little list that I made of other quote-unquote out-of-place artifacts or anomalous kind of artifacts. Voynich manuscript, which is a crazy book written in a language that we don't understand, with all these insane pictures that are hard to translate or make sense of in a lot of cases. We don't know where it came from. It's a very old book. Check it out if you want. The Stone Spears of Costa Rica, which are these giant balls. They're these giant stone spheres that have been, they're nearly perfect. Their symmetry is incredible. It's kind of mind-boggling how they could possibly have shaped these things so well and made so many of them. And they're very hefty boys. These things are scattered all over Costa Rica, or at least an area of Costa Rica. And there's a lot of different theories as to what they were used for, why they were there, but they're compelling and they're very strange. The Baghdad Battery, you probably heard about. That's discovered in Iraq, and it is a primitive battery. It's like a clay pot with anode and a cathode. I think that's right. But anyways, it holds a small electrical charge, and they're not really sure why it exists or what possibly could have been powered by it. There's a lot of theories about it being used for like metal plating and stuff like that, but very interesting little discovery. We didn't know anything like that existed until that one was discovered. There's the Perry Reese map, which is pretty interesting because it shows topography of Antarctica without any of the snow on it or ice or whatever. It shows like, mountains and as if there was trees there. It's just a very strange map, and it's based on older maps, but it's a neat little thing to investigate. There's of course the crystal skulls, which are interesting, but I would love to believe that those are real. They're very strange. I can't say how they were made if it wasn't a modern hoax. Look into it if that kind of stuff interests you. I'm not certain how much I buy into it, but I kind of, I guess, to put it in X-Files terms, I want to believe. I'll leave it at that. There's the Dropa stones, which are super weird. Discovered in China, I believe. They're like discs that have little hieroglyphics like all over them. They have no idea what they were used for, why they exist, how they were made. They're interesting little things. The Koso artifact, which I believe, I've just got a list of them here and I'm going off my memory of what these things are. I think that's the one that's like a little spark plug, basically like a modern looking spark plug inside of a rock. They cut it in half and split it, so it was at the center of this very, very ancient rock. I think they said it was around 500 million years old or something. I don't know. Fairly compelling. Again, it could be one of those cases where they're just wrong and it was a quickly formed concretion of sorts, but something worth looking into if you're into this stuff. The Antikythera mechanism, which was found off the coast of Greece, that region anyway. It was in a shipwreck, and it's basically like a small little computer almost. It gives various navigational information. It has like planetary alignment stuff. It's a way more complicated than we ever thought they had at that time. I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility for the Greeks to have built something like this, but it is very compelling. It's an interesting little thing. I think it's probably been a little more overhyped than it should have been, but the gear work is fascinating. It really is some amazing craftsmanship. There's Sakara Bird, which is the little thing that looks like an airplane. It's like a weird looking bird figurine. It's wooden. It was found in a tomb in Egypt. I don't find it that compelling, but a lot of people have made a huge deal about it. The Star Child skull, which is really weird. I don't want to spoil that one for you. I kind of just want you to look that one up. But it looks like an alien skull. There's the Kensington Ruin Stone, which was found in the US, but it has like Scandinavian ruin markings on it. So it kind of is another one of those things to lend a little bit of credence that Vikings probably were here long before anyone else as far as Europeans go. It's pretty cool. Some people think it's a hoax. Some geologists are fairly certain that it's not. It really just depends on which camp you side with on that one. Bell that was found in coal. It's another one of those found in coal artifacts. Don't know if it has much more evidence to support it than the other one that I mentioned, but it's another one of those. Would be extremely old if it is real, millions of years old. But there's also, speaking of coal, there's like walls that have been found in coal mines deep underground, like in the layers of coal. So they were there as the coal was forming. So they would be extremely ancient. There's a lot of accounts of this. I've seen a few pictures. I can't speak to the validity of it, but I did want to mention that too while we were talking about coal. But the list goes on and on and on and on and on. I could really sit here all night and tell you about things kind of half-assedly as I am right now. But there's a lot of stuff out there if this kind of stuff is interesting to you. So, I always encourage you to look into this stuff and see what you think. But I guess the point is there's no shortage of places and artifacts to prove that at least parts of our history around the world are wrong, and that they definitely deserve another look. I spoke about an artifact that couldn't be disproven at the end of the last episode, but I have to admit that I was wrong. And after much research, I disproved it to myself, which I guess is sort of a good illustration for being flexible in your views and being willing to actually change your mind when new evidence presents itself, which is something I encourage all of you to do, and something that I truly, truly wish our scientific communities would be more willing to practice, especially in the fields of archaeology and history. Truthfully, none of us can say that we know for certain really anything, and the wisest among us would probably be the first to tell you that they know nothing. They only believe. And that's pretty close to about all I have for you beautiful, curious-minded people out there tonight. There are a few news stories that I considered covering, but nothing that I felt I could bring you any real new info on, or that I thought would be a particularly compelling opinion that I had about them. So I'll just leave you with this instead. Always research for yourself. Always question what you are being told and why you're being told that. And always be willing to be flexible with your beliefs and accepting of changing them. Whenever you are presented with new information, if it conflicts with what you thought you knew, integrate what you can and be flexible with what you think you know. Because our history and this reality that we're in, whatever it is so much bigger, stranger, and unknown than any of us would ever believe. I hope you enjoyed our little journey through time, though, and I hope I didn't ramble too much in this BTR. It was mostly just stream of consciousness and these so forgive me if sometimes in a BTR I go off topic or I go in circles about something. My bad. I do my best to stay on task. But I'll be back with, another episode of the podcast next week. We may stick to the Friday drops just for a little bit longer, but we'll have to see on that. I'll let you know. I always make a post on the Facebook page and let you know if it's going to be out Friday or about the dates or whatever. And if you're a really good person, then you're probably already subscribed, so you get notified about any of the new episode drops. I have a really good one coming up next that I think you guys will enjoy. I've got some new info on an older story, not that we've covered, but that occurred a while back. And it's one of 2 true crime shows that I'm actually going to be doing in this season. And I know that will probably pique some of you guys' interest, but as always, I truly appreciate all of you for tuning in this week. It means more than you will ever know. I do have a small favor that I want to ask. It's totally free, but it does help keep this content coming out and ensures that it's always freely available to you. And it's very simple, and that is, if you do enjoy the show truly, please share it with others that you think might enjoy it. You can typically, click the little thing to share on any of these streaming sites, and it'll set you up to make a little post. If you want to give your thoughts or recommend your favorite episode or whatever, all of that's helpful, but really does make a huge difference for a small podcast like mine. And I really do appreciate it more than I could ever express to you guys. And thank you in advance. And thank you to everyone who's already done that and already told somebody about it that they thought would like it, or done something to help get the word out there. Every single little bit of that really means the world, and it does help more than you could ever know. But I guess that is about all I have for you this evening, guys. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening to the other 2 episodes, I hope, or this one was probably way out of context for you. But don't worry, I'll talk to you guys again real soon on the next Clandestine Radio.